Welcome everybody to Let's Talk About Dementia. The goal of this series is to share helpful and valuable information about dementia. And today we are fortunate to be joined by Lynn Biot Gordon, who co-founded NCCDP in 2003 and has many years of experience in the dementia care field. So Lynn, would you mind taking a moment to share more of your background with the audience?
Sure. I've been in elder care for 36 years. I actually started out when I was in college. I was working part-time as a social worker in a nursing home, and then when I completed my master's in social work from Boston University, I started working full-time at my nursing home and became a social service director, and that was 36 years ago, and I haven't left elder care since.
Wow. Great, well, thank you for sharing that background. And I was curious if we can start by talking about what is dementia?
Okay. So dementia is really the word to describe the set of symptoms that a person expresses. And oftentimes you'll hear people interchangeably use the words dementia and Alzheimer's, but they are different. So really when we use the word dementia, we're talking about the symptoms. So we're talking about deficits in language, memory, orientation, learning. And then when we hear people mention Alzheimer's, that's really just one disease. There's over 100 diseases that cause dementia. So when we talk about the symptomology of dementia, we're really talking about the expressions of the person, and really we want to fine-tune it. What is the disease that we're talking about? What is the disease that's causing the symptomology of dementia?
Got it. And would you be able to go into a little greater detail about those signs and symptoms associated with dementia?
Okay, so first of all, you'll start to see short-term memory problems. And then you'll find that some people start to have word-finding issues. And then you'll start to see some problems with like concentration. So if someone is, let's say, watching television while they're writing out their checks, now you'll start to see maybe that they'll lower the volume on the television so that they can better focus on balancing the checkbook and writing out those checks. So you'll start to see that in the beginning. What's most prevalent, though, is a short-term memory issue. And some people don't even realize that they're having short-term memory problems. So someone else will say to them, "Oh, you just asked me that question." And they say, "Did I?" So you'll start to see that because sometimes people don't recognize it in themselves at first. Someone points it out to them. So those are some of the early signs. And then as it progresses, you start to see, of course, decline, an increase in confusion, an increase in short-term memory impairment. So now if someone doesn't remember something that maybe happened last month or a week ago, now they might not even remember that they've had breakfast this morning. So you start to see the progression happen. And depending on what disease they have, their progression will be fast or slow. So different diseases that cause dementia have different kinds of progression. Most of them have slow progression, but some have kind of rapid change too.
Okay. Would we be able to go into more detail about the progression? Specifically, are there stages commonly associated with the progression?
Yes. And usually, it depends on what research you're reading. You'll hear dementia described sometimes in 7 stages, but to simplify it, most will describe it in 3 stages, like early, middle, or late.
Okay.
Early, middle, and late, I should say. And so in the early stages, as I said, you'll start to see, short-term memory problems. You might start to have some concentration issues involved. And sometimes you'll see personality changes too, only because usually someone's getting frustrated because they know they're starting to have cognitive problems. Yeah. And then as that stage moves on, as it progresses, then you'll start to see what we would call in the middle stage, where the short-term memory becomes more of a problem. That now, as I said before, rather than just forgetting what happened a month or so ago, we might not even remember breakfast from this morning. Also, what we'll start to see then is mood swings sometimes, time confusion, and especially during the fall when we have less sunlight.
Yeah.
So sometimes if a person drops off and snoozes and they wake up and they see the clock says 6 o'clock, they might not know if it's 6 a.m. or 6 p.m.
Right.
Simply because it's dark outside. So you'll start to see a little time confusion. Also, during the middle stage, you might start to see change in eating habits, because what's starting to happen is We might forget how to prepare meals, or we forget the order to prepare the meal. And what I mean by that is if someone's used to cooking an elaborate recipe, they might miss a step or miss some major ingredients. So now they start doing things that are easier, quick fixes, quick foods, just heat up tea and toast.
Yep.
Pop open the can of tuna. And also what you'll start to see too is that we start to sometimes have the perception that things don't taste the same. So now we'll want the extreme of flavors. So now we might want extremely salty, extremely peppery, extremely sweet. Is that? So, we might start to see that also with, a change in eating habits. So that's something, that, is again, progressive. You won't see that usually not very early on, but you do start to see those change in eating habits. Also, with speech and language, somewhere in the middle stage, you start to see more word finding issues that increase, as well as losing their concentration in the middle of a sentence and finding and sort of replacing words with other words. Saying sort of dead end sentences. Instead of saying, "Hey, did you park your car in the lot?" they might say, "Oh, did you park the thing?" And that's spot. We start using other words and even sounds. Like I was just talking to someone recently and they were trying to express something to me, and instead of saying the complete sentence, they ended it with, the da 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 da. And so I thought, okay, I know what I see. I know what I understand the expression. So, and being around a person, you start to see some of the same patterns. They'll start to use some of the same sounds or phrases, and you get to know what those things mean after a while when you're spending, consistent time with them. So as it progresses, then when we move from, mild to moderate to severe case, now what starts to happen is we might not be able to really complete full sentences anymore. We might just have very few words left in our vocabulary. So we might just say, some words like mama, coffee, TV. And as a caregiver, it's up to us to try to figure out what that person's requesting or what they need, because they only use this small set of words now to communicate. And again, that takes time. The more time you spend with that person, you get to know what those special words mean or nuances and phrases that they start to use. So that's one of the things that we start to see more so in the end stages. Also, we start to see more physiological changes during the end stages, like incontinence. So you start to see bladder and bowel problems. We might start to see swallowing difficulty, and that's where families are making the decision about, feeding tubes or other, alternative methods for nutrition. And that's when the person starts to usually also start to have like gait issues, and sometimes that'll start in the middle stage too. So you'll see that they don't have the same coordination they used to have. So there might be a lot of like trips and slips and falls, that kind of thing, which unfortunately sometimes leads to, fractures and surgery, unfortunately. Right. So once we get into the end stage, the person obviously needs a lot more care, usually cannot be left alone at that time. All their meals and all of that need to be prepared for them. Medication, of course, has been probably managed and monitored from middle stage forward. So at that point, they are what we would call, total custodial care with that, because at this point they need someone to do their laundry for them, organize their clothes for them, just everything at that point. Yeah. As opposed to like the early stages, jumping back and forth here a little bit, but early stage you might find that people are still able to organize their clothes, and then gradually they're not able to. So they'll start to wear like the winter coat in the middle of the summertime, and then you start to see judgment issues like still driving the car even though they've gotten lost a couple of times coming home from the grocery store that they live around the corner from. And that's where families have to make some serious decisions, because the person no longer has the ability to reason that they are no longer safe doing that. And another thing that happens usually mid to end stage also is visual perception starts to change a lot. So you might find that a person does not have, sharp visual acuity anymore. And so they might not have full vision, say, to their right side. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking to them and you're sitting on their right side, you might need to now change your position and face them directly. Or if you sit their meal on the table to their right side, they might not ever see the meal, so they might not ever eat if you've left them independently to just have their lunch and it's out of their field of vision. So we start to see those perception changes. Also with perception, we start to see also that sometimes dark patterns impact them as well. So if they're walking on a floor that's, say, black and white checkered, they might see the black spots with say, kind of like a misperception of depth perception, and they might think that that's a hole in the floor. So you might see them walk and stop, and you don't know why they've stopped, but it's because they might think that the black square on the floor is a hole. And so what they've taught us for years in the facilities is, to make sure people don't wander. You might want to have like black carpets around the exit so that people will, think that it's a hole and won't step in it. Although some people see it for what it is, a mat, and they'll step right on it and walk right out the door.
Right.
So it varies. And what, the thing about dementia is we're all very unique. Just like anybody, our chemistry is all different. Just like some of us are diabetic and some of us have hypertension. With dementia, it affects us all differently too. Our chemistry is different. So some people's progression will be faster than others, and some people won't have visual perception issues.
Thank you for going into detail about the progression of dementia. Clearly, you've been doing this for a long time and have a vast set of knowledge about dementia. I think that's a helpful framework for the audience to think about the progression in those 3 simple categories. So thank you again for that rundown. Now I was curious if you could just discuss in greater detail the causes of dementia.
Wow, that's a good question, because for some diseases that cause dementia, it's still unknown what brings it about. In other cases, it could be related to other medical problems like cerebral vascular disease, like someone who's had a stroke can be affected with dementia. Someone who has another kind of brain disease that will cause malfunction of oxygen or blood through the brain, so that can cause dementia. So there's a multitude of reasons that someone could have dementia, based on what their comorbidities would be or what their other illnesses would be. Also, it can be related to head trauma. Multiple concussions we have found historically now can cause what we call CTE. So chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So that's from, multiple head injuries, and that can eventually cause enough nerve and brain damage along the spinal cord that eventually causes dementia. So there's a multitude of causes. So when you ask me that, it probably would depend on what specific disease we're talking about, but in general, those are the basic causes. Some are just unknown. Some could be related to multiple head trauma, and others could be related to just multiple illnesses that might be causing disruption of blood flow or oxygen.
Okay, and a follow-up question, is dementia hereditary?
There is a hereditary component, but what researchers have found, especially with Alzheimer's disease, that there are what they call Alzheimer's genes. And you can actually do a blood test to find out if you have, a combination of any of the Alzheimer's genes. However, just because you have the Alzheimer's genes does not mean you're going to develop the illness. So we can't say for certain that your hereditary is going to catch up with you. In a lot of cases it does, because we do know in terms of developing dementia, your greatest risk is aging. The older we get, the more we increase our risk to develop dementia. Heredity is also a factor too. If you have a first-degree relative like parent or sibling that has developed dementia, you have increased your risk automatically of developing dementia. But again, don't be frightened. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to develop it. It just means your risk is higher than someone who doesn't have those presentations in their family.
Okay, got it. Thank you, it's very helpful. Last question for you. Is there a cure for dementia?
Unfortunately, not at this time. And that's been longstanding for over 100 years now, studying the different kinds of dementia that can affect the brain. Right now, the good news is we do have medications, and those medications are not meant to be a cure or a prevention, and they cannot reverse your condition. However, what the medications are designed to do is to try to create plateaus for a person, so that rather than having a rapid decline in their illness, that we get, stair steps of, plateaus of wellness before drops of decline. So that's really what the medications are designed for. So we never want a family member to have false hope in the medications. Right. And another thing to remember with the medications is that, again, as I said, our chemistry is different. So one person that has a really good response to a certain drug, another person might not have that same kind of response. So it's a very individual thing as well in terms of body chemistry and how we absorb the different medications too. So, just because someone says, oh, it worked well for my grandmother, she was able to continue to feed herself for a long time, it might not work well for someone else's grandmother.
Right. Well, that's a wrap in terms of questions. Thank you very much for your time as well as your expertise. I'm sure the audience has found it tremendously helpful. And it's been a pleasure to speak with you, Lynn.
Same here. Thank you so much.